Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show, folks. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand, and I have on the line with me a pretty frequently recurring guest who I always learn a lot from in Ohio. That's John Haller. So welcome, John. It's great to be chatting to you again today.
Good to be back.
And we were saying off air there's a zillion things we could cover. I don't know how far we'll get today, but yeah. In fact, how about for a change, Don, do you want to just open in prayer? That God guides us.
Lord, thanks for the time we can spend together. We'll bless our time. Pray that it will be honoring to you and helpful to those that listen. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So where do you want to start, John?
Well, I guess we can start with the Trump. Everything that happens with Donald Trump in the United States is magnified beyond all reason. So currently right now we have this impeachment proceedings are threatened to begin. There's been no formal vote. There's a lot of question as to whether Nancy Pelosi could do what she did. She has appointed Adam Schiff, who's the head of the House Intelligence Committee, to head up the impeachment probe, as opposed to Jerry Nadler, who I think is the head of the House Judiciary Committee. So Nadler is the head of the House Judiciary Committee. And it's sort of amazing that she appointed Schiff because last week, near the end of the week, Schiff was one of the first people to get his hands on this whistleblower complaint. He then read in front of the committee and for all the cameras, his version of what the transcript of the call would say. And none of what he said was true, other than the fact that President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine had a phone call. Other than that, everything was just fake and made up. So this has caused a firestorm. Yet he does that, and he gets appointed as head of the committee that appears as going to be doing an investigation. They're going after everybody now. They're going after Attorney General William Barr, who's had a long record of service with the country, going back to one of the Bush administrations. And it's just mass chaos in Washington. I think the best thing that I see coming out of it is that while Congress is tied up investigating these things, they're not going to be enacting a bunch of legislation that's going to impact our civil liberties and that sort of thing. So there is a bright side to all of the impeachment nonsense. Right now, I play golf with some friends, and they're conservative for the most part. One's a little bit more towards the center, but I can just tell you that these were all guys who grew up in blue collar homes, which would normally be Democratic homes. And they are just absolutely livid with what they see going on. And they're sending money to the Trump campaign. Trump the other day raised, I think, $13 million in a day or a couple days for his campaign. So, it's sort of having the opposite effect. But I think we are really on the cusp of something pretty serious here in the United States. I don't know exactly which way it's going to go. I know that Bob Jeffers, who's pastor of the large First Baptist Dallas church, came out and said, we're sort of in a civil war-like situation. I don't know if he said there would be civil war, but we're in a civil war-like situation. There's a lot of parallels that you could draw to what is happening right now, to what happened 160 years ago when Abraham Lincoln was elected. It split the country. And whether you want to say it was economics or slavery, it was probably about both. And we ended up with a horrible civil war that resulted in the deaths of about, I think, 800,000 people at a time when we had a population that was probably about 10% of what it is now. So that would be like 8 million people dying, proportionate to the population today. I don't know if it's going to end up in a civil war or not, but it is very contentious.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a huge proponent or fan of Donald Trump, but I also don't like these kangaroo court type situations. I'm not a Democrats fan either. I'm just
Right.
personally, pretty neutral. I don't trust any of them. But I look at this and go, well, this is actually what's happening in America now is kind of reflection what seems to be happening in a lot of places. And you've got this, EU situation with Brexit, and you've got this deadlocked election situation twice now in Israel, and sort of these type of things. We have a government in New Zealand which I can't stand, but wasn't really an elected government. It was a manufactured government when the party that had the most votes didn't get into power because a coalition of other ones joined up, and we've got this sort of leftist coalition. And I'm looking at all this stuff and thinking, there's chaos happening, and I don't think it's by chance. In fact, I can't see the chaos getting any less till eventually, whenever the point is that the man of lawlessness arises to bring the order out of the chaos. But yeah, when I look at this whole situation with Trump, it actually, and the supposed impeachment, it annoys me because I think it's largely theatre. I doubt Trump will get impeached. I mean, he may do, but I suspect Donald Trump is the next president in 2020. Again, if we don't have an economic collapse between now and then, it'll probably happen when he's next president, but
Yeah.
it's
Well, I've
just the
already
whole
seen.
thing's a mess.
Yeah, I've already seen the memes being posted on Twitter and Facebook. President Trump announced today that he will be leaving office at noon on January 20th, 2025. So, um, because that's what his second term would end, and he, so there's things he does that I don't really care for either. Some things he does are very good. I will say that there were, and I'm still researching it a bit, so I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it. But I mean, I was concerned with some of the things that he talked about in terms of the push for his religious freedom initiative at the UN meetings last week in New York. There's some things there that concern me as a Christian. That I, as a conservative evangelical Christian, I'm always very concerned about any push for a one world government. So I see, or one world religion, and I see elements of that. I think in some of the things that were discussed at the UN, and I don't know that these are all Trump's ideas either. I mean, he has people in the State Department and elsewhere that are globalist. And it's clear that there is some kind of deep state that's pushing their own agenda that may be different from Donald Trump's agenda. So I will say, I think it's without question, he has been an incredibly polarizing figure in American politics, unlike anything that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I would say that it may hurt him. In the sense that people just get tired of just being beat over the head about everything every day, about all these things that are going on. So I doubt that he may be what we call impeached, but he may not be convicted. The impeachment would set in place a procedure. They would appoint. The Democrats would appoint people to act as the prosecutors of him. There would be House members, or they might get somebody from outside, and they would act as prosecutors in a trial in the Senate. When it gets to the Senate, he has to get 67 votes, which means they have to flip 14 or 15 Republicans. And I just don't see that they'll be able to do that, unless something else comes out that's equally bad. But I read the transcript. I think it's another nothing burger. They're the press has been very dishonest in the way they've reported on it. On the head front pages of the New York Times and Washington Post the other day. They had taken the transcript and said, "Can I ask you a favor?" And then right below it, they put the part about Joe Biden's son, even
Yeah,
though
I
there
saw
were
that in your latest update, 540
Yeah,
words between it. Yeah.
yeah. So I think this is. I agree with you. I think it's some theater, and it may be that Trump has sort of pushed them to the point where they do things that aren't very politically expedient. The last time we had one of these impeachment proceedings in the United States under the Clinton administration, I guess it was 20 years ago. Seems like it was a lot longer, but it really backfired on the Republicans that pushed it. And I think it was clear to everybody that it was going to, but they just, you know how politicians are, that you start putting cameras in front of their faces and everything, and they just can't help themselves. So I don't think much. I think a lot will come of it, but I don't think it will result in Trump being removed from office. And I'm not so sure they want him. You know, if he's removed from office, Pence would take over, and Pence is probably more of a traditional conservative than Trump is.
Yeah. I can't see it being likely that Trump will be removed. I don't think that's in the grand plan of the elites for a start. I think they like having Trump there. That's my opinion. Because they want to destroy conservatism eventually, but they haven't done it yet. And I think it's handy having Trump in there with all his volatility while they're setting all these other things into play.
Right, and there's certainly, if the goal is to create chaos, they've succeeded in that goal.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. But it's also happening in other places as well, not just America. And then you've got this whole situation in Israel, and of course with the corruption charges against Netanyahu, and in a sense, it's sort of paralleling.
Well, there is a tremendous parallel between what's going on in America and what's going on in Israel. And part of it is there's a certain parallel, although I probably would diverge from some people that the divide in Israel is largely secular versus religious. The Orthodox parties have been able to gather and they have an outsized influence relative to their percentage of the population. And Netanyahu is thrown in with them. I think it hurt him in this last election round. I think a lot of people in Israeli society are tired with some of the positions of the Orthodox. They refuse to do military service. They are a huge welfare burden. They accept welfare. A lot of them don't even believe the state of Israel is really legitimate, but they're willing to take welfare checks so they can stay and study the Torah and frankly make babies. When we were in Israel 2 years ago, we stayed right sort of on the edge of an Orthodox neighborhood near the old city in an apartment, and you would go out at night, and every Orthodox Jewish couple had at least one or two babies or young children, sometimes more. I remember following a guy through the old city, through the Muslim quarter one day, and he had, he was talking on a cell phone, and he literally had 5 kids under the age of 6 or younger hanging on him, pushing a stroller with a couple kids in it up and down these steps in the old city, talking on a cell phone. And that's not an uncommon sight in the Orthodox neighborhoods in Israel. But the secular people that would be more represented by Danny Gantz and the center left, they're sort of fed up with it. And Yisrael Beteinu party under Avigdor Lieberman, who was a defense minister and part of the Likud coalition in just a little over a year ago when he resigned, he's just like, I'm not going to join any coalition with the Orthodox parties in it. So what you see there, I guess is a long way of saying, is you see a religious secular divide that's very so whether you like the Orthodox or not, they do stand for more traditional values, but there's a very stark divide between them and the secular people. In Israeli politics, though, between blue and white under Danny Gantz and Lapid, who's part of that coalition in blue and white, and Netanyahu and Likud, you're not going to find a tremendous difference on basic security issues. There's pretty much unanimity in Israeli society outside of the Arab parties and some of the left parties as to how they need to deal with security issues. Gantz used to be head of the Israeli Defense Force. So that's not where the divide is. The divide is religious secular and how that's going to work out. So, I think we're going to see, I personally think, looking at what's going on, people are tired of Netanyahu. He's been in office, prime minister, for over 10 years now, the longest serving one in Israeli history. And, with a lot of politicians, people get tired of you after a while. They just don't want you around forever. So there's some talk that they could do a unity party if Netanyahu resigned. The candidate that I've seen pushed to the forefront for the Likud party is Yossi Cohen. He's 58. He's about 10 years younger than Netanyahu, and he's currently head of the Mossad. But he's been sort of, I would say, I hate to use the term anointed, but he's been sort of approved as a future leader by Netanyahu. And it just may be that it's his time has come. So if something like that happened, I think they would have to have another election, but the third in a year. And if Netanyahu resigned, then somebody like Cohen could step up. I think the charges that are pending, they just got another extension on having to have a hearing on those. I think that's a lot of political theater, and it's very similar to what's going on with Trump here in the United States.
It's interesting, though, all of this stuff has kind of pushed the Jared Kushner peace plan into the background, where everyone was expecting unveilings of that months ago, but all these turmoils with elections and so on has kind of made that go into the back burner. Yeah,
and if there is one, I don't know if there is a peace plan. But certainly, the Palestinians, and I use that term in the, sort of how people use that term today. They have really lost a lot of weight throughout the world. I think people are just tired. They're tired of Netanyahu. They're tired of dealing with the Palestinian issue. I was struck on a related note. I played a clip of King Abdullah of Jordan yesterday in my update. I have to tell you, I hear Christians in America talking about how pro-Christian and friendly he is and how wonderful he is and all of this other thing. I have to tell you, I listen to him and I get angry. I mean, it really upsets me what he has to say, and because I know what he stands for. And I was tempted to. Well, I think I did post in a comment on a Facebook discussion to stop the Hashemite occupation of Jordan. The Hashemite tribe that Abdullah comes from, they used to be in charge of Mecca, the holy places in Mecca. But when the Sauds rose to power, roughly 100 years ago, the Hashemites were shoved out and were given Jordan as kind of a consolation prize. When Israel was formed as a country in 1948, Jordan occupied what we call the West Bank. They occupied the West Bank. I think 2/3 of Jordan, the population of Jordan, is Palestinian Arabs. And they really can't participate in Jordanian society to this extent. The restrictions on them are very similar to restrictions that might be on people who live in what's called the West Bank in Israel. And certainly the Palestinian Arabs that live in Syria are subject to the same restrictions to the extent that there really are even many of them left. And the Palestinian Arabs in Lebanon are also subject to these many restrictions. They can't vote. There's certain jobs that they can't hold. And I think Lebanon would like to push out the Palestinian Arabs. I mean, Syria has largely pushed them out through some of the carpet bombing that Syria has done of Sunni areas. So the Palestinians are really, sort of gasping for air anyway. So I don't know if the Kushner peace plan is even going to be, if it's ever going to be revealed. I don't even know if it's going to be necessary. I think people are going to deal with the Palestinian issue outside of a peace process at some point.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, now the other thing I really wanted to look at is the whole climate change agenda, and I know you've covered some of that too in your latest update, and I've done a little bit about it, and there's an awful lot more that could be said. So yeah, maybe we could look into a little bit of that.
Okay, I would say the operative term there is how dare you. How dare you bring that up? that was little Saint Greta.
Yeah.
At her little whatever she was, whatever role she was playing at the UN last week, and she also came to Congress and she was, scolding our government officials. She was scolding everybody at the UN. I saw people referring to her as Scoldilocks and that sort of thing. It's clear that she's been brainwashed to some extent. I personally, this is an issue I wrestle with, Tony, as to what's human caused, what's God caused in terms of changes in the weather and climate. We are constantly hearing, when we talk about weather events now, the term unprecedented is used almost all the time. And I think I opened my update yesterday with a little editorial cartoon from the UK that somebody sent me, that, a husband and wife sitting at home in the evening in their chairs. And one of them says to the other, it would be great to live in precedented times again, wouldn't it? And so I think that, it's very stressful, but look, I'm not denying that the weather is changing, but this is part of human history. But we also can't divorce the fact that some of the things we're going on right now could be God's judgment on different places. I live in Ohio. If you go 2 hours north of where I live is Lake Erie. Whenever the Ice Age was, and we all agree there was an Ice Age, there's just disagreement on how many thousands of years ago it was. There were glaciers a mile thick 2 hours north of where I live. They carved out the Great Lakes. They melted, they filled the Great Lakes. You can go to places in northern Ohio and you can see the grooves that were carved by the glaciers as they came through, because they had rocks in there. They're just perfectly little round grooves cut for a very long time in bedrock. So, and there was no industry when those glaciers melted. So the history of Earth has always been a history of climate change. I think that there's things going on with the sun. I think there's things going on with the Earth orbit, a potential pole shift that's coming up. It's either humans have always adapted pretty well to climate. Some people live in one of the elders at our church served as a missionary in Siberia for many years, where, he would go months and would never get above 50 below wind chill. And he loved it, and people survived and lived there and worked there. So, I often say if I have to fight for tea times in January in Ohio, I'm fine with that. I'll adapt to that problem. But there really is something going on, I think, in terms of what's happening. I I'm an attorney. I have a farm bankruptcy right now that I'm involved in, and a little bit different bankruptcies, the way the courts treat them. But everybody that I talk to about what's going on with farming, what's the long-term trend, they're saying that next year in America will be the disaster for farming. When you look at the corn crop right now, about 20 minutes from where I live is the Ohio State Farm Science Center, and they have a giant farm fair there. It was just a week and a half ago. And they bring in all kinds of equipment and that type of thing. But they have crops planted around the farm science area they have a landing strip there for farmers that fly their planes in for the event. And so they have a lot of hybrid corn, planted with all the numbers for the hybrid and that type of thing there. And it's usually some of the most amazing corn that you've ever seen. This year, it's awful looking. And this is the stuff that's planted for a show. It's very, very dry. We had maybe a half inch of rain over about an 8-week period in the middle of the summer here in Ohio, which is unusual. Put a lot of stress on the crops. And so some of the farmers that communicate with me say that they estimate that the American corn crop will produce about 20 to 25% of normal crop production. That has a huge ripple effect throughout the economy, especially here in the Midwest. Grain elevators, there's up near the bank that I represent, there's a huge grain elevator. And the last few years, they've had, at harvest season, they've had piles and piles and piles of corn out in the open because the silos are all full. And we just don't have the transportation capabilities to get all of that to market at once. So the corn was sitting outside. This year, there won't be any corn sitting outside. And a lot of grain elevators are going to go out of business. And so that can have an impact even worldwide. So that's a big crop. And the soybeans, which are the other big crop here in Ohio, to be honest with you, some look okay, some look good, but a lot of what I've seen traveling around the state is as bad as anything I've ever seen. They're not mature. It's just not going to be a good year for farming in the Midwest. And that has and I think that's part of what's going on with the weather and climate and that sort of thing. But the people at the UN, of course, it's all man-made, and we got to do something. And this is a way. I think it's certainly the socialists have seized on this as a way to get control of the economies. The other sort of the subtext of the UN meetings where St. Greta appeared and did her little rants on cue. There were extensive meetings last week. You can find them on the UN. The UN, if you're inclined to review all this nonsense, the UN has a multimedia website and a web TV where they have almost all the videos of everything that they do there to review. And there was meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting about the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 agenda. This is being pushed by the globalists, the socialists, and that sort of thing. And they're using the climate change as a way to sort of funnel the energy on those things. But I think that's really what's going on in the background that's driving a lot of this. Of course, there are also the climate change entrepreneurs that are trying to make a lot of money. I mean, I think Al Gore is worth, I've heard hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And and so it's sort of like
started off with $2 million in 2002. I mean, and then I think it was 300 million is worth in 2013, and he's richer than that now.
So there's money to be, and so some people are just doing it because it's a way for them to make money. But a quote I read was, I'll start taking climate change seriously when the people who are pushing the climate change agenda act like it's really a big deal. When they stop flying around on their private jets and that type of thing. I'll believe that it means something. But clearly, again, this is a lot of what I talk about, the convergence of events here. You have political chaos, you have the push of socialism, climate change, all of these various agendas get sort of mixed together with the goal of setting up, I think, a one world government, a one world religion.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear. And one of the ways they set up the one, for example, I suppose we can talk about the one world religion for a little bit now. One of the ways that they set up the one world religion is by tearing down the old ones. So you see the Pope pushing his ecumenical agenda. I mean, I'm seeing Catholics putting up videos now like, who is this guy? What is he doing? He's destroying Catholicism. And the answer is,
The answer is he's the first Jesuit ever to be the Pope.
Right. And he's just tearing the thing down. I mean, he came out in defense of another leftist. I was out of town today. I had a couple-hour drive back. I was listening to Eric Metaxas' feed was coming in on the stage, one of the local stations, because the talk show host was out of town. And he was talking to a Catholic guy, and the guy was just saying, the Pope's pushing this crazy leftist bishop or cardinal or something, and they called him on it. And so immediately what Francis did was he brought the guy to a Vatican for a photo op. So, a lot of people say, well, Francis must be the false prophet of Revelation. And I'm open to that possibility. But I often say, too, if he's not, he's certainly campaigning for the role, it would seem like. So all of this plays in. He met with the imam in Dubai. Yeah, the Al-Azhar University head imam, which is the most important Sunni theological institution on the planet. If you will recall, back in June 4th, 2009, Barack Obama went to Al-Azhar University and gave his sort of famous Kumbaya, Muslims are fine, we have no problems with Islam speech, which I think sort of was his signal to people throughout the Islamic world to rise up against their masters. And we had Tunisia, we had Egypt, we still have Syria. Egypt's now back into a bit of chaos as the Muslim Brotherhood's trying to make a comeback. Erdogan, he's pushing his Muslim Brotherhood agenda people. Qatar's funding them. Qatar has tons of money to fund all of this chaos. So again, the way these globalists on politics or globalists on religion foment this thing is they create chaos and they tear down the old institutions.
It's interesting. I don't know if you've seen the architectural designs for a supposed centre with the three main faiths that's come out of that Abu Dhabi meeting with the Pope and the Grand Imam, and so they've now got planning to have one for the Jews and one for the Muslims and one for the Christians/Catholics, all in the same complex. And to me, again, it's
Abrahamic. It's called the Abrahamic Center or Faith Center or something. Yeah,
it's smacks of a one world religion drive, and Pope Francis is pushing the climate change agenda to the max. He's got that meeting he's organising in May 2020. He's trying to get all sorts of people there. Basically, again, it's based on his encyclical on climate change and the need for a kind of a supranational / globalist body to deal with all of this stuff. It's all pushing towards a one world religion. And there's many things I could say about the man-made climate change, because I don't believe it is man-made. I look at it in many aspects. I'll probably have to do a whole video on it. But, they're using that as their agenda and their model to push this global government, the need for a global government, because we have to deal with the existential threat of this climate catastrophe that's coming on the world. The only way we can do that is by getting a organisation together to fight it, all nations. And New Zealand, I'm embarrassed of our Prime Minister is pushing this whole thing, and she did it as well at the UN.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of her speech, as much as I could
stomach.
Could bear. I mean, yeah. No, I mean it's Tony, it's happening on every level. There's this undermining of traditional thought, Christian beliefs everywhere you look. For example, Trevor Loudon, I think he's from New Zealand, isn't he?
Yep.
I mean, he did a great video. I can't remember, Enemies Within or something like that. And he has a new video he's working on called Enemies Within the Church. And on his website, where he's raising support to fund that video to get it produced, he had a clip of a recent Cru conference, CRU. That's the old Campus Crusade for Christ organization that Bill Bright started. Probably back in the 50s. And I have to tell you, it's absolutely shocking. I mean, I've been seeing this trend coming, but I don't think it's overstating it to say that Cru is gone. It's over. They've lost the plot. It was all about racial justice, social justice, all of these Marxist, neo-Marxist agendas, which is just infecting the church at every level. The Southern Baptists are losing the battle to this. Organizations like the Gospel Coalition, Tom Littleton, and some other people, I think his blog is 30 Pieces of Silver, have been covering it extensively. And, so they do it on social justice, the Marxists coming in that way. And then they're tearing down the sexual mores of the church. You have all these different organizations, one of the most prominent being Matthew Vines, who wrote a book called God and the Gay Christian, called the Reformation Project. They have a big conference coming up, and and they're very open now about stating, we're going to change evangelicalism. Because I think they figure if they can change evangelicalism, the rest of it is a piece of cake to push over into their one world government, one world religion agendas. So it's happening on every level. I'll give you an example. I think we mentioned this when I was talking to you just beforehand. New York City Human Rights Commission came out with they issued a press release the other day saying that, here's the title of it, New York City Commission on Human Rights announces new legal enforcement guidance and actions against discrimination based on immigration status and national origin. And here's a violation. Violations can be punished. They may be a misdemeanor, but they can certainly be punished by a fine of up to $250,000 per violation. And here it is: threatening to call ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, when motivated by discrimination, derogatory use of the term illegal alien, and discrimination based on limited English proficiency or unlawful discriminatory treatment under the New York City human rights law. Now, again, what this is doing is it's controlling people's speech. You can't even call someone an illegal alien. Now, I have to question is the New York City Human Rights Commission violating its own rules by using the term illegal alien in their statute? And maybe they need to come up with something else because, frankly, I'm triggered by their use of the term illegal alien. And I don't care what context it's used in. So this is New York City. This is one of the most important financial centers in the planet, and they're doing this nonsense. Now, I think it's clearly unconstitutional, but who knows that a court will ever decide that type of issue correctly? when I saw somebody post about this, they said, well, hate speech is not, free speech doesn't include hate speech. And this is what a lot of people believe because they've had it beat into them in colleges and graduate schools now that, hate speech, you can never say something that somebody else considers hateful or feels is hateful. That's not part of free speech. And that's just nonsense. That's changing the way the First Amendment in the United States is to be interpreted. I don't know. It's troubling. I'm a lawyer and I'm used to crazy bad arguments, but they're at a different level now.
That is, yeah, it's interesting. Just watching all of these things happening, like you say, it is a real convergence that's going to result in persecution, I think, for Christians. I think that's coming. We've got, I noticed in New Zealand there was some survey, I don't know how many people were in the survey or whatever, but Christianity has been overtaken as the number one religion in New Zealand by a so-called no religion. And I saw another sort of outfit in New Zealand that is not Christian, but supposedly fighting the New World Order and all of that and waking up people. But I noticed his comment, the guy that runs that, is saying, well, it's just, about time, that they got rid of the fairy tales. I can't remember his exact word, but basically saying Christianity is a fairy tale and we need to be fighting climate change. And that's supposedly, someone that's been exposing a whole lot of stuff, and some of the things they've published has been pretty good. But now it's like, so that's where you really stand.
Yeah, it's being torn down on every level. I mean, and it can be very disconcerting. I'm heading up to Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, British Columbia, Thursday to speak at a conference Friday and Saturday. And it's the theme of the conference is Church for the Churchless. Because I get emails, messages constantly, Tony, and I'm sure you do too. And everybody that I talk to that's in any kind of public ministry, whether we intended it to be that way or not, the question we get asked is, I can't find a church that stands for truth, that's not fighting this, or that's not caving in on every level. Yeah. So you look at an organization like Cru, and I feel fairly comfortable in saying is you need to really question whether you support an organization like that. Go look at Enemies Within the Church website, find the clip on Cru and what they were teaching at one of their recent conferences. I even saw another one where one of the directors of Cru, I forget what his title was, had invited a rank Roman Catholic anti-evangelical mystic to come speak at a Cru conference. Now, she declined, because at least she had the integrity to say they wanted her to sign, that she, I don't know if it was that she wouldn't speak against their statement of faith or she agreed with their statement of faith. And she said, I can't sign that document. But okay, so fine. But why did you invite her? What's going through your head that caused you to invite her? A friend of mine, Marcia Montenegro, by the way, she has a site, Cana, Christian Answers for the New Age. Yeah. She's been writing extensively, and I don't know if you've had her on your program.
I think 2 or 3 times I've had her on.
Okay.
Yep.
She's done just tremendous work on the Enneagram nonsense that's invading the churches. And I mean, I'm doing a little research on it, and she's way, way beyond me. But she's tying up she's making the connections that this is coming from people like Richard Rohr, who's been heavily influenced by Thomas Keating and Thomas Merton, who is a Buddhist more Buddhist than Roman Catholic monk, but all these people in evangelicalism are falling for it. And a couple weeks ago, the convocation at Liberty University, which is the largest Christian university in the world, had two people there talking about the Enneagram. And it reminds me of a story that somebody told about Jerry Falwell. And he was sort of railing, the founder of Liberty University, but he was sort of railing against false teaching in the church. And the lady said, well, this is the way my church was going. But he goes, well, you should leave. She goes, I can't leave. My grandmother's buried in the graveyard. To which Jerry Falwell supposedly responded, well, if she could get up, she'd leave with you. And based on what you're saying is actually going on. But so I see this happening everywhere, but I see it happening so quickly. I first heard of the Enneagram about 5 years ago, and now it's sweeping over evangelicalism. Matt Chandler at his church is pushing it, endorsing books that push it. It's at Liberty University. It's at conferences. It's coming into these spiritual formation programs and seminaries and Christian colleges, and it's not Christian.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because it's also following, we've got the increase in Christians practicing yoga, and also the contemplative prayer, or contemplative prayer, however you want to pronounce it, that's crept more and more into the churches, all of which are Eastern practices. And so is the Enneagram.
It's sweeping over. And listen, it's what you would expect when the whole principle behind a lot of these mystical practices is to empty your mind.
Yeah.
Well, when you empty your mind, it's going to be filled, it doesn't turn into a vacuum. It fills up with something else, and it fills up with nonsense like that. So and this is part of my message this weekend, you got to stay in the Word of God. That is your only defense. And if you look at for example, the armor of God in Ephesians chapter 6, and relate it back to passages in the Old Testament that sort of have the messianic prophecies in them, like Isaiah 42, Isaiah 59, maybe it's Isaiah 45, Isaiah 45, Isaiah 52, Isaiah 59. The whole thing is rooted in truth. And when you get away from that truth, you're defenseless, and you're going to fall for everything. And I see it happening. And look, I saw it happening to the fellowship that we used to go to a church to belong to. A few pastors saw it. Others said, one of whom told me one time, he said, they don't even realize how far gone they are. They don't even see it because they've gotten away from the truth.
And it is interesting to me watching how many of the people in these churches, these Christian supposed circles, are joining I think the Gaia worship, climate change religion. And in New Zealand on Friday, we had all this march. I think they're having them around the world, all these students and whatnot, and other people joining them, marching against climate change. And I don't know how accurate it was. They said 170,000 people marched in New Zealand on Friday in favour of it. And I saw photos, you've got all these people standing up there with plaques like Mother Earth knows best and all of this, and you've got Christians joining with these Gaia worshipping Wiccans and so on with this whole thing. And then of course, like we see, Pope Francis is pushing the global religion, and you've got the United Religions Initiative and all of these things, and it is all converging into a falling away from true Christianity and even reason. It's like you can't question the climate scientists because 97% of them are in consensus that there's man-made climate change. Well, I'm sure 97% of that 97% also believe in evolution and reject, creation. So it doesn't mean just because there's a consensus that it's fact, that it's based on fact. It should be based on facts, not on consensus. And to me, there's a whole lot of things that go, hang on a second, this is flawed, this argument, but the world's jumping on it as a basis for a world religion and a global government. And it's like, the stuff's plain as day, and will be swept away, and banned from speaking against this at some point.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. And by the way, I don't know, you mentioned evolution just as a sidebar. There was a great video series on a program called Uncommon Knowledge, which was put out by the Hoover Institution at Stanford. And they had sort of a little discussion with Stephen Meyer of the Discovery Institute, one of the big pushers for intelligent design, who was recently, by the way, some friends, he was on a trip to Israel learning about sort of the archaeological background and truth of a lot of what's spoken of in the Bible. But also, they had Stephen Meyer, David Galertner, and I think it's David Bolensky, the last two of which are, I think, both Jewish but both secular. But they're talking about the fact that Darwin is just not a sustainable theory any longer. So it's interesting that as these things fall apart, they're more accepted, I guess, is the interesting cycle that we're in, which I think plays into this whole Bible prophecy thing. There's a warning there that they'll depart from the truth and they'll give themselves over to fables. And so you see it. You see the climate change fable. You see the one world religion fable. You see the transgender fable that's coming out. And the things they're doing to children in the context of that, it's just, it's very disconcerting to someone who believes in the truth of the scriptures to watch all of this going on. I've talked about it for a long time, as I've talked about and taught about these things, that they're coming. And I have to admit to you that now that they're here, I'm sort of like, okay, I didn't expect this. I didn't expect it to be like this before the Lord returned. I really did not think that it would go that bad. I mean, I'm looking at a thing in the New York Times yesterday, which, look, New York Times is no friend of conservatism or traditional values or anything, but they had a big article on the front page continuing on 3 full interior pages, Stolen Innocence Gone Viral, looking at like the reports of child sexual abuse imagery on the internet. In 1998, there were 3,000 reports of that. 3,000. A decade later, it hit 100,000, 2008. 2014, it hit 1 million for the first time. These are child sexual abuse imagery reports. Last year, 18.4 million. So they've gone from 3,098 to 100,000 a decade later. 5 years after that, 1 million, and 5 years later, 18 million reports of this in a year. I have to tell you, Tony, it's this is New York Times.
Yeah,
reporting this. It's dark out there, and the only hope is the light of Christ and the truth of Scripture. I'm more convinced of that than ever, but I will admit, I look at this, I talk about it every week, and I just have to sit here and shake my head a lot of the times, like, I just can't believe what I'm seeing.
So as we wrap up now, John, what would your final words, you would like people to hear at the end of this show? What would they be?
Well, as I'm preparing my talk for Vancouver, some of my talks for Vancouver this weekend, the thing that Christians have to do is stand in the power and might of Christ and in the light of the truth of him and what he did for us, and the truth of the light of the Word of God and the wisdom that's there for us. I think that it's really to the point where that's I think it's important to look at all this stuff and see that it's going on so we understand it a little bit. But we've got to be grounded in the Word, or we will be swept away just like everybody else.
So can you tell our listeners your website and your YouTube channel, and also if they want to see you in Vancouver, how they can do it?
Yeah. So the church website that I speak at is Fellowship Bible Chapel. That's fbchapel.org. There are links there. We live stream on Facebook and live stream, and then it's put up on YouTube on our YouTube channel, which is under Fellowship Bible Chapel, or my name. If you just put my name, John Haller, in a YouTube search, it should come up. Although I will say, you cannot have your browser or your YouTube set up for restricted mode. If you're in restricted mode, you won't find hardly anything that I do at Fellowship Bible Chapel, because almost every video I put up now is immediately put into restricted mode. I might be inappropriate content. So I'm up there. I think I'm actually having a greater percentage of my stuff put into the penalty box than Dennis Prager at Prager University. And I have no idea why. You try to find out from Google, YouTube, and they don't tell you. So Fellowship Bible Chapel, fbchapel.com. And then I'll be speaking at the Moriel Conference in Vancouver. It's if you go to Moriel, MORIEL.org, you should be able to find the details of where the conference is. I don't think it's being live streamed, but it will be put up on the Moriel TV YouTube channel as soon as it can be after the conference.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot of stuff in the hour today, John. As always, it's been fascinating, and the hour's gone really fast. So thank you so much for coming back on, and all the best for your Vancouver talks.
Okay. Thanks, Tony. God bless.
God bless you too. And folks, visit aminutetomidnight.com. All our shows are on our website, aminutetomidnight.com, as well as articles. And the shows, of course, are also on YouTube and on iTunes. Don't forget to like it, give it a thumbs up, and share it. And also, if you want, you can donate to A Minute to Midnight on our website. We do run 100% by donations. Thank you to the people that do donate to us. It's very much appreciated, and we couldn't do it without your help. The music I've written, played and recorded, and you can download it on our website as well if you want. That's it for today. Hopefully we will be back with another show in a few days' time. God bless, have a great week, and this is Tony saying goodbye for now.